high-end semiconductors, and what new tricks could the U.S. be conceiving to hold down Huawei and other foreign companies whose only crime may be their excellence? I'm pleased to be joined here in the studio by Professor John Gong, Vice President of Research and Strategy at the University of International Business and Economics, Israel, and from Bangkok, Thailand, by Jeffrey Towson, partner of the Tech Mode Consulting. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So exactly, how has Huawei, or why has Huawei shocked the world, Professor Gong?
Well, I think because of the phone's chip. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't even call it a 7-nanometer chip. I would say it's a chip that is comparable in capacity, in capability, and performance to a 7-nanometer chip. Because we can all talk about debatable the definition of what that really means. But at the end of the day, it's a phone that really functions. It's selling very well. The U.S. government is investigating into this. I think if you look at Jake Sullivan's statement, it's still trying to find out where is that manufacturing capability is coming from. There have been several theories being proposed. One is that the chip, of course, is possibly one of the inventories Huawei has built up before the sanctions is being imposed. The second theory is that Huawei is putting up a assembly line itself using second-hand equipment. It's actually a very active second-hand semiconductor equipment, but there's some debate over whether you can do this for a chip like this, for making a chip like this. And the third theory is regarding whether SMIC is violating any sanction rules that's being reached upon between the company and the United States government. I think at this time, the U.S. government still hasn't got an answer yet, so I think it's still investigating.
How much is known here in China, though, about these chips? I mean, who exactly made it? With what technology have they made it, and what is the breakthrough?
I don't have a definite answer yet. I think we're still waiting for a definitive answer. Maybe we never know. And why should we know? I think as long as this phone is being sold well, as long as consumers are buying it, and as long as it's made in China, we know it's made in China, of course. Who cares? It's good for the company. It's good for China as well.
Jeffrey, what's your take on exactly what's significant about this new phone?
I think the first thing everyone concludes is symbolically it matters. I mean, this is a chip that works at a high level much faster than everyone thought this was going to happen, right? People talk 5 years from now, 2023. I think the business question here is, okay, can they make such chips at scale cost effectively? Was this some sort of workaround? Did they spend kind of a lot of money that's really not viable economically to make a certain number, or can they actually make effectively 7-nanometer chips at not efficient scale, but enough to be viable products in the market at scale? Now, if they've done that, that changes the market. I think that's kind of question number one, and we don't quite know how they're doing it yet.
Well, the fact is they've done it, and they have the guts to release it, despite all the baton, the terrifying sanctions that the U.S. has put out there. And the phone was released quietly, without advance publicity during U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo's visit to China, and that was the first such visit in 5 years by U.S. Commerce Secretary
the State Department, the Commerce Department, all kinds of organizations, several district attorneys in several states are filing suits against the company. So in other words, I mean, the whole America is fighting against this company, and yet this company still survives. Not only survives, it thrives. So this is a great story for corporate America, for corporate China. I'm sorry.
Jeffrey, what's your take on this? Because Ren Zhengfei, the founder of Huawei, seems undeterred before and after the company was put on the entity list. He said, and that sentence impressed me, he said, "We're not alone. Our friends are all over the world." And he said this after the company was put on the entity list, just as what John has said, basically the company was standing up to the state power of the most advanced country in the world. Do you think the company has survived, has managed?
Yeah, let me disagree a little bit. I mean, this is not the U.S. This is not the U.S. This is the U.S. government. The American public has no opinion on any of this. And in fact, a lot of these American companies like NVIDIA, they want to sell to China. Absolutely, they do. So this is really coming from the government for various reasons. No, I was at the Huawei headquarters back in 2019 when the first entity list ban hit. And, Chairman Longhua talked about this. And what I like about Huawei is I don't think they're very direct. They talk like engineers. They were very honest about, this is a major deal for us in chips and operating systems, and we are fighting for our survival. I mean, it was very direct language. So the whole coincidence with the timing, I don't think they operate that way.
Yeah.
But they've been talking openly. We're fighting for survival, and they've kind of used this to reinvigorate their culture. They've really battened down the hatches. You're talking about 200,000 people, most of whom are engineers. So, I think they're 5 years ahead of everybody if this is what we think it is. They've really kind of shocked people with how fast they've turned this around.
It definitely caught the U.S. by surprise, the U.S. government by surprise. But U.S. Secretary of Commerce Raimondo told media that what we will not compromise on is preventing the sale of our most sophisticated, most powerful semiconductors to China in response to Huawei, or after Huawei rolled out the new phone. So is the U.S. in a dilemma it created itself? On the one hand, the sanctions seem to clearly not have worked, but on the other hand, they won't admit it has failed.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Let me first say I do mean by the U.S. government, actually. Of course, Jeffrey is right. Now, regarding your question, Liu Xin, I think you're absolutely right. The State Department the Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, is under immense pressure. If you look at the financials of the recently released financials from the major semiconductor companies, including Qualcomm, Intel, they're all in big trouble. I mean, as a matter of fact, these companies are laying off people. So there's a lot of question about whether this strategy, so-called small yard, high fence strategy, is going to be effective in ultimately slowing down China's semiconductor business. It's hurting American companies, and let's face it, there's no doubt about it. And I think the dilemma is that it's not only hurting American business, it's not going to slow down China's technological advancement in semiconductors. On the contrary, it actually provides more impetus for developing even more indigenous technologies even faster and better. So I think this strategy is very much in doubt, even in Washington. But let me say, in the short run, Jake Sullivan is not going to admit a defeat here. He's going to double down, and he's going to stick to his policy. So this is a dilemma that the United States government is in, and it's going to continue this way for some time, in my view.
Well, specifically, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said at a press conference in reaction to this question that he would withhold comment until he got more information about precisely Huawei's new phone's character and composition, while insisting the U.S.'s so-called small yard, high fence strategy will continue. Well, my problem with such kind of response is that, Jeffrey, in the first place, how can the U.S. decide what it can do to a foreign company based on suspicion, without public evidence, without substantiated evidence that a company is involved in wrongdoing. It just slaps sanctions on a company that it deems to be a threat, and that's it. And then, the US is God. I decide when I lift the sanctions, which are wrong in the first place, which are, illegitimate in the first place.
Yeah, I am an American citizen, so I'll talk, I'll criticize more openly. This is something we haven't seen before. This is the US government attempting to politically weaponize the technology supply chain, not just saying, hey, you're an American company, you can't do this. They're telling foreign companies what they can do with other foreign companies. Well, we haven't really seen that before. And I think give it credit, it was effective tactically in the short term. It was a big move. Strategically in the long term, they have convinced every company in the world, do not have a single source supplier for critical technology, because that is now a risk. You can look at it in the annual reports of almost every tech company in the US, outside of the US. They cite this as a risk. Single source of critical technology, especially out of the US, is a risk. So let's diversify, have other sources.
So literally the United States, by wanting to de-risk with China, made itself a risk to companies that are in the chip making or whichever, even the cutting edge EUV producer ASML in the Netherlands. They are stuck. They can't sell these machines to China, but who are they going to sell to if China produces its own EUV machines, John?
You're absolutely right. Jeffrey used the word convince. I think maybe used the word convince when it comes to American companies. When it to a company like AMSL, it's clearly coercion to me. It's just a coercion. Forcing other companies outside the United States, foreign companies, not to do business with China in certain products, certain technologies. And these companies are not stupid in my view. I mean, they're sitting back and look at the huge losses of revenues for a company like AMSL. And they're also concerned that China is developing rapidly to come up products that are closing the gap or even comparable to their own products. So I think they're trying to find ways. As a matter of fact, we have observed that MSL is trying to come up ways of circumvent a policy from Washington. In a sense, trying to sell other products that can deliver the same capability.
Yeah. Well, the problem is for the next foreseeable future, either out of humiliation or desperation or whatsoever, is the picture going to look nicer for companies such as Huawei from the United States? I mean, there are already congressmen saying, okay, Huawei violated US sanctions, we're going to do something about it. Jeffrey, what do you foresee coming next? And now that Huawei has proved it didn't die, it will not die.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict what happens out of political circles. I'm not in those circles. I think it's easier to predict what companies will do. Every major company in China, in Asia, in South Korea, in a lot of countries is convinced you cannot be dependent on US for a single source critical technology because they will use it. We've seen it. So now it's really hard to exert this sort of